Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Alice. Thank you so much for joining me. Today's video is going to be about Mercury retrograde. We had a new moon in Sagittarius on December 12th of 2023, and that new moon was at 20 degrees of Sagittarius, and the new moon was square Neptune, which was fresh direct in Pisces. It went direct on December 5th, at 24 degrees of Pisces. So the new moon was in a waxing square, so approaching the square exact at the new moon. And then as it moved on, as quickly as the moon does, it moves through a sign about every 2.5 days. So it moves quick. And so then it, after the exact new moon, then it made that square to Neptune. So in this video, we're going to be talking about Neptune because there's been a Neptune influence, but also, of course, this Mercury retrograde. So the Mercury retrograde, as I said, happened just after the new moon on December 13th. And it went retrograde at 8 degrees and some minutes of Capricorn. So you can see what house that was happening in your chart. Was it aspecting any natal planets that you have or angles in your chart? Because if so, then it would be even more significant, more prominent, more vivid. You would see its expression in your life. And then you can be looking at, okay, what information am I getting with this? Based on what's showing up in your world. So Mercury retrograde, all Mercury retrogrades are going to be in some ways like a Neptunian influence, because the retrograde pulls consciousness inward. And so it really asks us to go more into our right brain thinking rather than our left brain thinking. So Mercury, as it rules Gemini and Virgo, is part of our left brain thinking, and it's linear, right? And so we're gathering information in a linear way, but through that experience, we actually, during the retrograde, can then pull consciousness inward and actually kind of read between the lines from the information we've been getting. We might actually kind of have insights. Retrogrades are often also correlated to a Uranian aspect, because it can bring in the retrograde unexpected or sudden developments. And in this case, with Mercury, in our thinking or in our communication, something that we're perceiving that maybe was in a communication that we didn't recognize when it was happening, or that we're kind of seeing more of a wider breadth of the information, because it's tuning into the higher mind. And the higher mind is not linear. It actually takes all the information that we are exposed to and then actually makes sense of it from a kind of a more heightened dimension of our consciousness, where we're actually able to see all the information and kind of just know things. This is that part of our experience and consciousness where we can just be, experiencing this feeling. I just know this thing, and I don't know exactly why I know. I just know. This is the right direction, or this is what is presenting itself as a clarity in the moment, given all the information. And that's what Mercury retrogrades help us to do, is to actually really assimilate information in a new way, in a more holistic way, because we don't want to just be working with only our left brain, right? We want to be integrative. We want to be integrating left brain and right brain thinking, the physical mind, the ego mind, and the higher mind, the soul, and its capacity to interpret through different avenues of information. So can be even energy, through that energetic transference rather than the definition of the energy, right? So Mercury retrograde just after the new moon is kind of interesting because Mercury has a special relationship with Sagittarius's ruler, Jupiter, because Jupiter rules Sag, and what sits across from Sagittarius is Gemini, ruled by Mercury. And so Mercury and Jupiter have a very, they work together. They're collaborating so that we have a holistic point of view. So we have this part of our own consciousness that collaborates with these different aspects of our consciousness. So we have a holistic point of view. So I find it interesting that, Mercury went retrograde the day after that new moon in Sag. And what's really interesting too is that then Mercury goes direct on January 2nd, but also Jupiter goes direct on December 31st. So just a couple days, just within, just a bit more than 24 hours from Jupiter going direct, Mercury goes direct. And so let's talk about Neptune, because Neptune has a special relationship with Mercury. Also, Neptune has a special relationship with Jupiter. And why do I say that? Because Jupiter also rules Pisces. So Pisces has a dual rulership. Pisces is ruled by Neptune and by Jupiter. And Neptune is doing some interesting things. So Neptune went direct on December 5th at 24 Pisces, and it had been retrograde since June 30th of 2023. So on June 30th of 2023, Neptune went retrograde in Pisces, and it went retrograde at 27 degrees, which means that it was square 27 degrees of Sagittarius. And what is that 27 degrees of Sagittarius is the galactic center. And if you're not familiar with that, you can go back in my videos. I recently did a video about Neptune stationing direct, so you can get more information there. And I won't go into all the details so that I'm not, people that are following the videos, they're not hearing all the same information all the time. But basically, one of the things that I've been recognizing with all the themes going on during Sagittarius season and with Neptune is that Neptune scoring the galactic center is really kind of this dissolving of the way in which the collective has related to the stories of the archetypal stories of our own consciousness within this galaxy, within this part of the universe, and the archetypes that we're all living, really, and how we relate to them, and what stories they play out, but how we can recognize that the stories that these archetypes play out has very much to do with how we're actually looking at the story, what angle of perception we're looking at, and what thoughts we're having about it based on the beliefs that we've likely osmosed from the collective unconscious. Because Pisces is like the cosmic womb, and it is associated or correlated with the collective unconscious. And so this is where we can just kind of osmose ideas, perceptions, ways that we look at things, ways that we define things, and belief systems that are created from that based on those ideas, perceptions, cultures, as well as societal beliefs that we kind of were just born into, and we were just kind of submerged in, right? And we're submerged in that consciousness, and we may not always be conscious of exactly what we're choosing when we're doing that. So we can take on different ways to look at things, different perceptions, different angles of perception, different beliefs about stories, the stories that we live out in our own lives and in the collective, and how our own individual story is a contribution to the collective. And that we are co-creators of that story based on how we define things, based on how we're looking at things, and then how we develop belief systems to support that. And then we use those belief systems, not necessarily consciously always, but we use those belief systems to support the reality, the internal reality, how we construct the internal reality, which then is expressed in the external reality, right? It's reflected through the external reality. So Neptune, when it went retrograde and exactly square the galactic center, is very potent, because if you don't already know, just Neptune being in its own sign is pretty special to live through, because it takes 164 years for Neptune to re-enter its own sign of Pisces. And so the fact that we're experiencing that is special, because what it's doing is it gives us the opportunity, if we're working with that transit and we're paying attention to what's happening in our lives, so we can see that we can be dissolving ideas, perceptions, thoughts, beliefs that we osmose that isn't really resonant with our own personal internal story, our own connection to source, how we relate to anything and everything in the outside world. And that's very much based on our relationship to source. In other words, our relationship to our own consciousness, our own selves, our higher selves, that part of us that is, not separated from source. We are source, and we navigate our consciousness with the way in which we choose to define things and what we believe in, and how our belief impacts, or the way in which we look at things impacts the way that the stories play out in our own lives. And then, of course, in the collective unconscious as well, how the story of our own lives is a contribution to the collective. So with Mercury retrograde, I think that, one of the things to consider is that Mercury retrograde went retrograde in Capricorn. So it first started its pre-shadow at 22 degrees. And if you're not familiar, pre-shadow just means that Mercury starts covering the part of the sky, the part of our own charts, the part of our own psyche, that it will retrograde through. And so that started at 22 degrees of Sag. That started on, let me see, I wrote some notes here. Let me make sure I get the correct date for you, November 25th. And so it started its pre-shadow November 25th at 22 Sag, and made its way to 8+, so 8 degrees and some minutes of Capricorn, right? And then went retrograde just after the new moon in Sag. Now, I want to just share with you a specific date. On November 30th, Neptune was in its pre-shadow. I'm sorry, Mercury. Get that clear. Make sure we're being clear here. Mercury actually traversed that degree of 27 degrees of Sag on November 30th, where it was right at the galactic center. And so remember, that's covering the degree that the Neptune was squaring when it went retrograde on June 30th. And so could have had some clarification there, or some information that would be pertinent in this Mercury retrograde. And then Mercury, as I said, went retrograde on December 13th, and it will go direct at 22 Sag on January 2nd, and then it actually is in its post shadow after that, and that's until January 21st. And then it reaches that 8 degrees of Capricorn again, and then it moves forward. It moves on. And so we can look at the pre-shadow, the post-shadow. is actually recapturing the degrees that it retrograded in, right? And then it moves on, right? And so we can look at that pre-shadow, the retrograde motion, and the direct and post-shadow as a whole cycle within itself. They're all components of the same cycle. So it's not just about the retrograde. It's about the pre-shadow. It's about what's happening in the post-shadow as well, how things are resolving in the post-shadow. So, and how, like, when we come into that resolve, we've gotten all the information that we're going to get in this cycle, and then we can apply it, right? So, a lot of this, because Mercury is traversing Sagittarius and Capricorn, it's really important to understand the way of psychological development in the wheel, because it's, in its pre-shadow in Sagittarius, which is all about really what we're really believing in, and how our thoughts, perceptions, ideas, and communications can be expressing what we really believe in. And then how Sagittarius is really about the belief structures that we actually form, and the belief system that we create for ourselves based on our thoughts, perceptions, and ideas. And then how we use those beliefs to then structure our consciousness from the inside out, which is then Saturn and its rulership of Capricorn, and then Saturn as it rules Aquarius as well. So we get this opportunity to be really looking at, what are we really believing in? When we tell a story in a specific way, how are we speaking about that? What angle of perception are we actually telling the story in? And what story is that telling us about ourselves, meaning about what we believe about ourselves as well. And so we can be utilizing this Mercury retrograde to assess, is this in alignment with what I value? And why do I say what I value? Because Jupiter goes direct in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. It's the inner side of Venus. Venus is the ruler of not only Taurus, the inner side of Venus, but then Libra, the yang side of Venus. And the south node of the moon is at Libra right now. So these two are kind of helping us to really assess, are what we believing in, is this actually an expression of our own sense of self-trust, our own sense of self-value and values? Are what we saying, communicating, perceiving, the angle by which we're looking, is this really actually in alignment with what I value and my own value of myself, my own self-value, my own real trust in myself, and the integration of that self-trust, as Uranus is in Taurus as well. So this is really helpful for us. And, remember that Mars is in Sagittarius. It's been in Sagittarius. So that's also giving us the opportunity to look at, well, what are we instinctually believing in? Because remember, Mars just acts on instincts. So we can really see what we believe in by how we're acting and what we're acting on. So we can be looking at all of that right now with this Mercury retrograde. Now, remember that as Neptune goes direct, it's moving towards that 27th degree of Pisces. It's going to square the galactic center again in direct motion on March 8th of 2024. And interestingly, that's just right before the eclipses begin. So we have an eclipse on March 25th of 2024, and also an eclipse on April 8th of 2024. And so I think it's interesting that it squares that galactic center again, direct. So again, we can really be experiencing more of a pressurized energy around, well, what story is your personal story, and what is the story of the collective?